Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Lethbridge police spoke out about concerns regarding the amount of racing and stunting in our city. Members of the UCP caucus were meeting today to discuss the potential of lifting more restrictions in Alberta. And Prime Minister Justin Trudeau speaks out that more transparency is needed on the trials of the two Canadian Michaels in China.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. An Edmonton area pastor is being freed after spending 35 days in jail for violating a bail condition that he not hold church services. Pastor James Coates can be released immediately, but must first pay a $1,500 fine. Coates was charged after officials said Grace Life Church violated public health orders to limit the spread of COVID-19. All but one of the charges were dropped, and Coates must pay the fine within 12 days. A trial will begin on May 3rd on the remaining charge for holding services allegedly violating size restrictions on gatherings. The Alberta government has decided against easing its COVID-19 restrictions due to rising hospitalizations. Health Minister Tyler Shandro says it was a necessary call to help the province avoid a third wave and again put more pressure on the hospital system. Shandro says moving to Stage 3 of Alberta government's four-part reopening plan depends on hospitalizations for coronavirus patients remaining below 300. The province is expecting to have close to 300 in hospital with the virus within a week. Shandro says a lot of the blame can be laid at the feet of the Trudeau Liberals.
Since the start of the pandemic, provinces have worked to limit spread while Ottawa failed to procure the vaccines. Alberta has held up our end of the bargain. Ottawa didn't. However, we won't quit. We've administered nearly 490,000 doses, and there are over 70,000 appointments already booked for this week. And the rollout will only grow. We'll keep on expanding Alberta's vaccination program and getting doses into the arms of Albertans as soon as we receive the vaccines.
Dr. Ari Jaffe teaches pediatrics at the University of Alberta and recently published a study on the effects of the pandemic lockdowns. Dr. Jaffe says these restrictions Canadians have had to endure are causing much more harm than good.
If you do a cost-benefit analysis of the effects of lockdowns, that it comes out against lockdowns, that their collateral harms are far higher than the benefits that they serve. And in fact, a minimum number in several cost-benefit analysis is that lockdowns cost 5 to 10 times more harm than benefit, and probably realistically it's more like 40 to 50 times more harm in terms of population well-being and mortality over the long term than benefit.
Catch the full interview with Dr. Jaffe as he discusses the collateral effects of the lockdown measures. That's coming up later in our newscast. A couple of Lethbridge schools are returning to online learning due to increased cases of the novel coronavirus. Both Emmanuel Christian Elementary and Emmanuel Christian Secondary Schools have seen an uptick of confirmed cases. The elementary school has seen 3 positive cases requiring 67% of students and 71% of teachers to quarantine. There are also 3 positive cases at the secondary school requiring 47% of students and 50% of teachers to self-isolate. After consultation with the Ministry of Education, both schools have moved to online learning until at least the Easter break. Another union representing Alberta healthcare workers in Alberta has said no to a request from the province for another delay in contract talks. The Alberta Union of Provincial Employees says its nursing care members and support workers in healthcare want to return to the bargaining table. Finance Minister Travis Taves calls the union's decision disappointing and accused the union of wanting Alberta Health Services to shift its focus away from the pandemic to their labour demands. United Nurses of Alberta, which represents registered nurses, has also served notice that it too wants to return to bargaining. The Lethbridge Police Service say they've received a high volume of calls about drivers who are speeding, racing, and stunting in our city. As Micah Quinn explains, the fines for these measures come at a pretty hefty price.
A speeding fine will net you a $110 to $495 ticket with 2 to 6 demerit points put onto your license. To top that off, the ticket prices for stunting, racing, and driving carelessly are even higher.
Stunting is a $567 fine, as is racing and careless driving. So quite extensive fines in the province of Alberta for those offenses. On top of that is the demerit structure that they will be applied against your driver's license.
A large amount of complaints have come from Mayor McGrath Drive, Scenic Drive, 24th Avenue South, Whoop Up Drive West, and Métis Trail West. Talbot says that the public can do their part when they see a vehicle committing these acts.
Document license plates, write them down, take a video, take a picture of them. Be willing to provide a statement and attend court if necessary. Contact our complaints line at 403-328-4444, and we will investigate those complaints.
Talbot says that the Lethbridge Police Service wants to educate the public that these actions won't be tolerated, and LPS are trying to help improve the roads in our city. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
It's no secret that the Lethbridge Police Service has been thrown negatively into the spotlight over the past year. But the question is, how did this happen? Is it a case of poor administration from the past administration, creating a bad culture, or a case of some members who are simply just bad apples? BCN's Jeanette Rocher spoke with the president of the Lethbridge Police Association to get a feel for the morale and culture at the LPS.
We know that there's a special amount of attention on our organization right now. And though it is uncomfortable, it is also to some extent necessary. I think they've been able to see the weather setting in for some time, and you can kind of tell when a storm's brewing.
A storm that could have some serious consequences, according to Lethbridge Police Association President Jay McMillan. Recently, LPS Chief Shaheen Madizadeh sent out a letter to LPS members informing them of the suspension of 5 police officers following an incident where memes had been passed around the department depicting the former administration in a negative light. Madizadeh warned there would be some rough days ahead, and according to McMillan, these rough days could include some serious forms of discipline following the hearings.
The way that discipline is designed in the Police Act or the Police Service Regulations is to be progressive in nature. The more that someone finds themselves in trouble, the higher the temperature rises for them. And the range of discipline, not specific to these guys involved in the meme investigation, but generally speaking, the range is anything from official warning to termination, with all points in between, including forfeiture of hours, which comes with a financial impact as well.
But where did this all begin, and how did it get so bad?
These behaviors like this can also be symptomatic of a bigger picture. And I think if you look at this predicament we're in now, everything that's coming to light currently is something that happened during a time that was perhaps the most tumultuous in our organization's history as far as relationships go and unity. This stuff all dates back a few years ago where there were some fairly well documented issues between the leadership and the members working here. We have spent some days in an organization that was not healthy.
The 5 officers will each have hearings at a future date where all the facts will come out. For Bridge City News, I'm Jeanette Rocher.
So many Canadians are taking advantage of the low interest rates right now in purchasing a home. An interest rate under 2% for a 5-year closed mortgage makes it pretty affordable for first-time home buyers. Sean Ormston, the founder of Great Rate Realty in Lethbridge, says if you're thinking of buying a home for the first time, you have to keep in mind that there are other expenses outside of the down payment.
Legal fees can run somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000 when you're purchasing a home. You also have to think about the property tax situation. That's the one that's often forgotten about, is at what point in the year are the property taxes due. And so while the property taxes are calculated to the day, depending on the time of year you buy, you may have to come to the closing table with a check to shore those up. Or in some cases, if you're buying earlier on in the year, you may receive a check from the sellers for the time they've occupied the home up to that point.
Real estate broker Sean Ormston will also discuss if he thinks southwestern Alberta is a buyer or a seller's market right now. That Q&A is coming up after Business News. Food banks across the country are receiving donations from Loblaw's Spring Food Drive. The company is asking grocery shoppers to donate at the register or through a food donation bin. The Lethbridge Food Bank Interim Executive Director says our food bank is in dire need for non-perishable food items.
We can always use cereal, like boxed cereal. We can always use canned fruit. We can also use any canned protein, tuna fish, salmon, all of that sort of product. We can use condiments such as mustard, ketchup, pickles, honey, peanut butter. All of that is coming in handy. And one thing we don't get a lot of that we have a demand for is gluten-free product.
The food drive will run until April the 4th. Seniors in British Columbia aged 78 and up in many regions of the province began booking their COVID-19 vaccine appointments today. The province announced a revised schedule which says everyone who is eligible will receive a first dose before July 1st. People aged 77 and over can start booking on Tuesday, and those 76 and older can call on Thursday. Indigenous people over the age of 55 became eligible on Saturday. Manitoba's declared a COVID-19 outbreak at the Riverview Health Centre in Winnipeg. The personal care home has a total of 387 beds and supports people in palliative or long-term care. The care home learned of an employee who tested positive for the coronavirus, but said most of the residents have already received both doses of their vaccine. By definition set out by the province, a single lab-confirmed case of COVID-19 for an employee of a personal care home constitutes an outbreak. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau recently commented on the trials of the two Canadian Michaels taking place in China. Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig are being tried on spying charges. Trudeau says it's impossible to know if the trials are fair when there's just no transparency.
One of the challenges around the lack of transparency on that process is it becomes extremely difficult to make judgments around whether or not the trial was fair. I can certainly say that in Canada, we are a country of an independent justice system that values transparency as part of the process in terms of ensuring that justice is fair and done properly. I'm going to continue to advocate for the release of these two Michaels who've been arbitrarily detained and push for transparency around the processes by which these trials are ongoing.
So far, there's been silence out of Beijing on what happened to Michael Kovrig. His trial ended on Friday with no announcement about the status of the proceedings. Canadian embassy officials were barred from the courthouse. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau also says he's pretty confident his government's approach to gun control is the right one. Now, many legal firearms owners in our country would disagree. Trudeau did add, however, that he's open to hearing suggestions for improvement. Family members of women killed in the 1989 École Polytechnique massacre denounced the bill, saying it would not make society any safer.
We're continuing to move forward with further legislation, including measures that limit importation of ammunition across our borders, strengthen border measures, give municipalities more tools to ban handguns, and other things that are going to keep Canadians safe. And I look forward to the parliamentary hearings on that bill to make sure that we're doing everything we can. But as always, I continue to stand with survivors and families of victims of violence against women, of gender-based violence, and we will always work together.
U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris offered solace to Asian Americans as she and U.S. President Joe Biden visited Atlanta days after a gunman killed 8 people, most of them Asian American women.
Racism is real in America, and it has always been. Xenophobia is real in America, and always has been. Sexism, too. For the last year, we've had people in positions of incredible power scapegoating Asian Americans, people with the biggest pulpits spreading this kind of hate. Ultimately, this is about who we are as a nation. This is about how we treat people with dignity and respect. Everyone has the right to go to work, to go to school, to walk down the street and be safe.
Also south of the border, new guidelines at assisted living facilities are allowing families to once again visit with their loved ones.
A little hug. Being actually able to hug you today was so special because it's hard to see someone and have to be 6 feet away from them or sit on opposite sides of the bench or walk around together but not be able to hold your hand or put our arms around you. So today being able to hug you was very special.
We're a very huggy family.
Yes, we are.
And I think that's I think that's one of the things that we miss, is being able to touch each other, to kiss each other, to embrace each other. This is the beginning of the very best to come, hopefully, for all of us, because it's been really the worst year.
We had a mixed bag today, cloudy with light showers, then cleared up in many parts of southwestern Alberta today, and some of the moisture we received may be sticking around. Full weather details are coming up. You can certainly tell that spring has sprung in many parts of the province. Not a lot of snow on the ground anymore, but check out this picture that Linda sent us of a goose near Hinton. Not just any goose, but a white Canada goose. Very nice. I mean, look at that. A white Canadian goose. I think that's the first time I've ever seen a white goose like that. Thanks again for sending the picture, Linda. We really appreciate it. And hopefully a white goose is not a sign that more snow is in the forecast. Jeanette Roche is here now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, could we be seeing more of the white stuff here in southwestern Alberta?
Well, unfortunately, Hal, that white goose could be an omen, because tonight we could see a 30% chance of rain showers or flurries, changing to a 30% chance of flurries later on this evening, with a west wind at 20 kilometers per hour, gusting to 40 near midnight, and a low of -3 overnight tonight. Into tomorrow, another 30% chance of flurries could be in the forecast early in the morning, and then clearing up. Winds near 20 tomorrow and a high of 9 degrees. On Wednesday, cloudy with a high of 11. Thursday, periods of snow and a high of only 2. On Friday, a mix of sun and cloud could be expected and a high of 10 degrees. Saturday, partly cloudy skies, high 7, and a high of 14 on Sunday with partly cloudy skies as well. According to the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 7 degrees, the average low -6. Our high temperature on this day was back in 1939. It was 22 degrees. And in 1966, we had our chilliest day, which was -22. 7:30 is when the sun rose this morning, and our sunset this evening, 7:47 p.m. Looking to the national forecast, Victoria, high of 12 degrees with a mix of sun and cloud, partly cloudy skies also expected in Vancouver tomorrow with a high of 10 degrees. In Edmonton, sunny, becoming a mix of sun and cloud in the morning, and wind up to 15 per hour, high of 5 degrees. And in Calgary, they can see a high of 5 degrees as well. Risk of a thunderstorm this evening, though, but mix of sun and cloud tomorrow. Looking to Saskatoon, mainly cloudy skies, clearing in the afternoon and a high of -3. Mainly cloudy in Regina with a high of 0, and 10 degrees is the high tomorrow for Winnipeg with mainly cloudy skies and wind gusting to 50 per hour late in the afternoon. Looking to the central part of our country, Toronto, increasing clouds in the morning with a high of 14 degrees and a beautiful 19 degrees tomorrow with sunny skies in Ottawa. Sunshine also expected in Montreal tomorrow with a high of 16 degrees. In Atlantic Canada, Fredericton can see a high of 14 under sunny skies. Get out your sunglasses in Halifax also. It's going to be a sunny one there. 13 degrees is the high, except for 8 along parts of the coast. 13 also expected in Charlottetown with sunny skies, and a beautiful sunny day also expected in St. John's, Newfoundland with a high of 10 degrees. There you go. That is your forecast.
Shares in CP Rail were down just over 4% on the TSX after it announced a deal to buy U.S. rival Kansas City Southern. Canadian Pacific says the deal, worth $25 billion U.S., will give it control of more than 32,000 kilometers of rail in Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. It says it'll be the first single-owner rail network linking all 3 countries. The merger is expected to face scrutiny by the Surface Transportation Board, a U.S. federal regulatory agency which must approve the agreement. A new study out says AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine is providing stronger protection for adults. It says the vaccine was 79% effective overall at preventing symptomatic cases of COVID-19, including those 65 or older. The company also says it did not identify any safety concerns related to the vaccine, including finding no increased risk in blood clots identified in Europe. The findings move the vaccine a step closer to being approved in the United States and help rebuild public confidence in other countries. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says for-profit means less care, less hours of care, and less quality food. The party tabled a motion on Monday calling on the government to end for-profit long-term care by 2030 and to stop licensing new for-profit homes.
In general, we know that we've got to completely change the long-term care system to provide better care for our loved ones. But specifically, there's overwhelming evidence that long-term care that is for-profit means less care for our loved ones, more likelihood that our loved ones will fall sick and lose their lives. And that is exactly what the evidence has shown. So we want to stop that. It is not enough to stand by and talk about the plight of our loved ones in long-term care. We need to do something about it.
The motion includes a call to immediately turn Rivera from a for-profit chain owned by the Crown Pension Fund into a publicly managed entity. Seniors Minister Deb Schulte opposed the motion, pointing to provincial jurisdiction over health care. Aimia is selling its stake in AirAsia's loyalty program, Big Life, for a 2.2% stake in the airline. The agreement values the shares at just over $31 million. Aimia says the swap will leave it with a 3.1% stake in the airline when combined with shares it already owns. Company officials say the deal will allow Aimia to benefit from what it believes a significant upside in the AirAsia shares with the added benefit of liquidity. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 38 points on the day to finish at 18,815. The Dow was up 103 points to 32,731. The S&P 500 was up 27 points to 3940. And the Nasdaq was up 162 points on the day to 13,377. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 13 cents to 61.55 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 4 cents to 2.57 US. Gold was down 7 cents to 1738.96 US an ounce, and silver was even on the day at 25.75 US an ounce. Wheat is at $305 per metric ton, barley's at $308, canola's at $7.85, and corn is at $339 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 38 cents to 118.78. Feeder cattle were unchanged at 139.43, and lean hogs were up 80 cents to 95.05. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 79.85 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the Alberta government has decided against easing its COVID-19 restrictions due to rising hospitalizations. Health Minister Tyler Shandro says it was a necessary call to help the province avoid a third wave and again put more pressure on the hospital system. Shandro said moving to Stage 3 of the Alberta government's four-part reopening plan depends on hospitalizations for coronavirus patients remaining below 300. The province is expecting to have at least 300 in hospital with the virus within a week. Is right now a good time to buy a home in southwestern Alberta? Outside of a down payment, what else should you save your money for when purchasing a home? Sean Ormston with Great Rate Realty has some advice for us when it comes to home buying. That interview is coming up momentarily. The Alberta economy is still going through some pretty tough times. We have the recession, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the lockdowns. But how has this really impacted the real estate market? To talk a bit more about it, talking about buying and selling here in southwestern Alberta, is Sean Ormston, CEO of Great Rate Realty. Sean, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Now, Sean, we all know how devastated the oil and gas sector has been. It's really impacted real estate and businesses in Calgary, Red Deer, but not as much here in southwestern Alberta. We're more agriculture-based. Have you noticed a bit of a difference with the economy, especially when it comes to buying and selling a property?
No, I have noticed even over the years, as the economy goes in southern Alberta, we're pretty consistent. And that's a good thing because people can rely on stability in the market. And that's something that hopefully they can plan for. We like to plan for things, and it's nice to have stability in the market. So we get that in southern Alberta.
So what are we at right now in Lethbridge specifically? Are we seeing more of a buyer's or a seller's market right now?
Well, it's interesting. If you look at the last decade, we've probably been mostly in a buyer's market, but we are transitioning. Some of the power is now falling to the sellers, and we can see that. I was looking at some numbers today. We've got home sales that are up about 50% this year so far. Wow. From last year's numbers. We have sale price of an average of $320,000, and last year where it was $285,000. So we have about a 12% increase in sale price as well. So things are on the up and up.
Well, that's good news. Now, let's talk about some of the bigger markets in Canada. We've seen massive increases in property values, including what we see in Vancouver and Toronto. But what about Lethbridge? Do you see more of a slow, steady increase, maybe 2 to 3 points per year when it comes to building equity?
What we've seen in the past is up years and down years, very, very small, 1%, 2%. So not a lot changes. Sometimes we get 2%, 3%. We can string together a few years where it feels like we're getting a lift, and then we might have kind of a balancing that, things balance out. But But this year, this is the time we're seeing, like I said, a 12% increase in the first sort of 3 months of the year, 2.5 months since we've got going this year.
Now, we've seen record low interest rates, Sean, under 2 points for a 5-year closed mortgage. Do you think this trend will continue? What are your thoughts?
Well, we were seeing interest rates. We've got some mortgage brokers in our office. We were seeing rates getting down as low as 1.5%, which was unbelievable only in the last month. However, we've seen money also flow into the bond market recently. When money flows into the bond market, that's what drives interest rates higher. And, things are around that 2% that you mentioned. But I think we'll see that for a sustained period of time, as the Bank of Canada seems to always announce that their interest rate is on hold, at least in recent months, recent years. I anticipate that interest rates will remain low for a sustained period of time.
Is a variable rate mortgage still a good option in our current market?
I always tell people, consult with your bank, consult with your mortgage broker when looking at rates. If you look historically, it always seemed that variable rates were better, but the margin, to me, in my opinion, is so thin on variable rate mortgage notes. It doesn't seem like it would make a lot of sense to choose a variable rate over a fixed rate.
Now, I locked in my mortgage a couple of years ago, a 5-year close for 2.79%. I thought, hey, that's a pretty good buy, pretty good deal, right? More goes to the principal, less to the interest. Is it maybe a good time right now to renegotiate a blended mortgage with rates so low to try and get closer to that 2% mark?
Every mortgage, from what I've learned from mortgage brokers sort of informing me, is a little bit different. And there are penalties in each mortgage. There are prices that you have to pay to get out of these products. So when it comes to refinancing, I think you have to be very careful. You have to meet with your mortgage professional, meet with your bank, and really run the numbers to make sure that it's a good idea to either refinance or step into a blended product.
Now, you mentioned earlier the average price is around $320,000. So I guess people that have homes $250,000 to $300,000, they're selling a lot faster?
Yeah, we're starting to see the days on market and the inventory drop, especially in the $200,000 to $400,000 range, where affordability is apparent. Even though the homes above $400,000, we're also seeing a jump in the number of units sold. I just had a look at those numbers, and those numbers are quite staggering. Last year to this point, there were 32 homes that sold. This year in Lethbridge, this year there are 77. So a jump of about 140%. So it sounds like a big number. Prices are about the same. I looked at an average about $477,000 for $485,000 for those homes that are in the upper price range. But as you mentioned, most homes are selling in the $200,000 to $400,000 range, and they're selling in fewer days on market this year than last year.
So what do you attribute the hot market to? Is it that maybe people are working from home more often now? They want bigger office space? Is they're working maybe a hybrid? What are people telling you right now?
I think it's a combination of things. The interest rates being low are fantastic. That's something that people can really get excited about, because they can lock in a low rate and have lower payments as long as they qualify at the stress test that is put in place by the government. I think the pandemic has made a lot of people realize, or a lot of people have been forced to work from home. And so while they sit in their houses, they're thinking about, gee, I need more space, or, we really need to have a spot for the office, or something like that, where people might have a continued period of time where they are working from home. And thirdly, which I don't think a lot of people talk about, is we also have a large group of buyers, younger buyers, that are sort of coming of age into the market. Many of these buyers are, we might refer them as millennial buyers. They're under 35 years old right now, but a lot of them went to school. They had school debt to pay off. They had to wait a little later in life to buy homes. And now we have a large demographic that I believe is coming into the market in all centers, ready to buy their first home, somewhere between the age of 30 and 35 years old.
Let's talk about different areas of Lethbridge which seem to be more popular. I know people here that work at the station, they love the north side. Other people prefer the south side with the big trees, the bigger lots, but you get older homes. And then still there are others who love the west side because the newer homes and you're close to the ATB Center. And it seems to be more high density on the west side. What are you seeing right now?
Well, it's interesting. The west side has definitely grown the biggest in Lethbridge. There are as many people on the west side of Lethbridge now as there are on the north and the south combined.
Wow.
So a lot of the growth in the city over the past year has been on the west side. That's what really propelled this city into a 100,000 plus population as we've seen that growth. So people are choosing to live over there that want those newer homes, want those newer neighborhoods. There are newer neighborhoods, of course, on the north and south. Typically, the west side gives people a really good bang for their buck, and amenities have been developing on the west side. To your point about the ATB Center and the shopping that's come as the years have gone by.
You know, it's funny, I live on the west side and we're saying, we need a Walmart. You know, we need a Walmart superstore there. And so, you know, we've been campaigning for that. I kind of envy people on the south side because you got all of the amenities right there. It's amazing. And the beautiful mature trees. I really love that. Sean, during the COVID-19 pandemic, are people a little hesitant to venture out to open houses or maybe showings right now? What are you seeing?
You know, there's been really good leadership and guidance from the Alberta Real Estate Association on how to handle showings, viewings during the COVID pandemic. Obviously, everybody's worried about, contact and services. So the Alberta Real Estate Association has mandated that realtors, when showing homes, only bring 2 people with them on each showing. And so if you have a party, even kids involved, we're swapping people out of, in and out of the house to make sure everybody gets to see the home that needs to see the home, whether that's the buyers, the parents, whoever. We're only taking in 2 people at a time. Everybody's masked up, everybody's sanitizing. We advise sellers to leave all the lights on, all the interior doors open, to limit the touching of surfaces. So I think everybody in our industry has done a really good job to pay attention to what we can do as licensed real estate agents, as well as follow the guidance of the Alberta Real Estate Association to make sure we're keeping people safe.
Now, you mentioned stress tests earlier, Sean. Talk a bit about stress tests and the tougher mortgage requirements. How do they actually work?
Well, I have a love-hate relationship with the stress test as a realtor, and I understand why the government put it in. They put in an interest rate that is more expensive to qualify at. So what they're trying to do is protect people from borrowing too much money. However, as a realtor, I get concerned that there could be some overstepping because the interest rates are so low today. People can lock in money, like we talked about, around 2%. And so I've ran some numbers with the mortgage brokers who are in my office next door, and we've looked at things, and for a 5% down buyer, they're losing about 30% buying power on the price of the home they can purchase because they're having to qualify for the stress test. And that's difficult in a place like Southern Alberta. I wish that the government would take an approach to stress testing for the much higher dollar value homes where it does matter. And I'm not saying where it has to be 500,000, maybe $1 million, whatever it is. We are seeing markets like Toronto and Vancouver where prices are north of $1 million for an average home. And that's just not the case in Southern Alberta, like we talked about. Average so far for the year is 320,000.
Have you seen what you get in Vancouver, though, for $1 million or $1.5 million? You don't get a lot. It's a little bungalow, maybe 700 square foot, built in the 60s. It's a fixer-upper. Think about what you can get here in Lethbridge in southwestern Alberta for $1 million. Now, Sean, if the stress test was removed altogether for the more stable markets like we have here in Lethbridge, how much of a difference do you think that would make for buyers?
Well, I think it would make a huge difference. Like I said, it's about, for your 5% down buyers, or people coming into the market, first-time home buyers, it's about 30% more buying power. So, a $300,000 mortgage or purchase could be a $400,000 purchase. It's that much of a difference. And there is a big difference in the quality and caliber of home from $300,000 to $400,000. Now, would we expect the market to also lift in prices? Absolutely, we would. So it's just, we're in the same boat though as everybody else. Everybody is required to follow the stress test rules in the country. And so we're no different, and buyers just have to navigate that at this point in time.
Are you noticing maybe a decline in younger people looking for homes because of the stress test?
I think some younger people are discouraged because they have to qualify at such a higher rate, and previous generations haven't had to do this stress test. I think, as long as you're borrowing fixed money for at least a 5-year term in Canada, I don't know that any of us can predict the future much more than 5 years anyway. So I'd like to see whatever that rate is to be the one that they can actually qualify for. So I think to your point, there is some discouragement, but like I said, it's the world we live in, and we don't make the rules, we just have to live by them.
Now let's talk about advice you have for a young couple looking at buying their very first home. We had a couple of young couples here at the station bought their very first home. It was beautiful to see. But it's more than just the 5% down, isn't it? You've got the legal fees for your real estate lawyer. I mean, there's so much more, isn't it?
There is a little bit more. Legal fees can run somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000 when you're purchasing a home. You also have to think about the property tax situation. That's the one that's often forgotten about, is at what point in the year are the property taxes due? And so while the property taxes are calculated to the day, depending on the time of year you buy, you may have to come to the closing table with a check to shore those up. Or in some cases, if you're buying earlier on in the year, you may receive a check from the sellers for the time they've occupied the home up to that point, to which you'll have a nice big property tax bill due in June anyways. So you do need to plan for these things.
You know, Sean, some people actually co-purchase a home, joining up with friends, parents, or siblings to share the mortgage. Are you seeing more of an increase in this type of home buying right now to make it more affordable?
In our market, I think things are pretty stable with that. Most home buyers are the only ones on the purchase contract. We do see co-signing from parents that are jumping in to help their kids buy a home. But I think in markets where prices are a lot more expensive than ours, you see a lot more of that. I looked at some statistics for markets like Toronto, Vancouver, and some of these expensive markets, and as much as 2/3 of all buyers are needing a co-signer to be able to purchase those very expensive homes. In Lethbridge, the nice thing we love about Lethbridge is that it's affordable, and $300,000, $320,000 is still a very affordable price tag in Canadian housing when average home prices across the country are flirting with $500,000.
How well are some of the bedroom communities doing around Lethbridge, like Coaldale, Raymond, and even Nobleford?
I think they all have, there's all various reasons to move to these communities, of course, and people like the smaller town life. Places like Coaldale, it's really big lots that are out there for even the new building areas.
There's a great
like
bakery out there too, we
Nobleford,
can't forget, right?
there is a great bakery out of Coaldale, absolutely. And Nobleford is a neat place because their property taxes are so low. And so if you are looking at your overall cost to live, that's a place where almost everybody's property taxes are under $1,000 a year. And so, and still you're on, city water, municipal water and sewer, which is important to people. So places like that people that want the small town life, I think those places will flourish.
Sean, we only have about a minute left here. Let's talk about floor plans. As you get older, like myself, I'm not a big fan of the 2 stories anymore. 15 steps up, 16 steps down, 31 steps. I'm out. That's it. I'm done. I bought a bi-level. People love bungalows. What are you seeing right now? Are the baby boomers and the Gen Xers preferring less steps?
I think as everyone gets older, they prefer less steps. That sort of seems to be the trend. Once in a while, we get folks that, some seniors that are really fit and they want the 2 stories. They want to do those steps every day because they think that that's something that's going to help them in their activity. But I think most of us prefer one level living as we get older. So we're seeing that desire. But the flip side to that is land is at a premium. And when land is at a premium for new housing and new development, the builders would prefer 2-story homes because that's what they can fit in some of the lots that are provided. To get bigger homes, they have to be 2-story. So we're seeing a good mix out there. Of course, lots of bungalow and bi-level buyers, but as time goes on, especially when we go back to the west side where all the new development is, majority of those homes are 2-story homes.
And we can't forget about the 4-level and 3-level splits too, right? Great talking real estate with you, Sean. Thanks so much. Sean Ormston, CEO of Great Rate Realty. Appreciate your time today.
Thanks very much for having me on.
It seems that the majority of medical community believes that COVID lockdowns are necessary to protect society. But perhaps that majority is shrinking somewhat as some high-profile physicians are arguing that collateral damage from the lockdowns may actually do more harm Then good. Today's guest is Dr. Ari Jaffe. He teaches in the Department of Pediatrics at the University of Alberta and has practiced at the Stollery Children's Hospital for 25 years. He recently published a study on the effects of the lockdowns. He joins me via Zoom from Edmonton. Great to have you with us, Dr. Jaffe.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. We got a lot to cover here, so let's get right to it. It's interesting that you were initially in favor of lockdowns, but you later changed your mind. Why were you in favor at first?
That is a good question. At first, the data coming out of China made it sound like the case fatality rate from the SARS coronavirus 2 was quite high, around 3%. And there was some modeling coming out that suggested that there would be a very high number of deaths from COVID across the world. And this induced fear and contagion of fear. And we all thought that lockdowns were the right response to prevent these infections from occurring.
So what was it then that changed your mind on the effectiveness of these lockdowns?
Yes, well, that was a process. I think there were several things that I came to realize. One was that as a healthcare practitioner, I didn't have expertise to properly weigh the costs and benefits. So like I think my colleagues, I was focused on one thing, and that is the virus and COVID and the pandemic, and trying to prevent the adverse effects of the one cause of illness. Without adequately considering all the trade-offs that are involved. And information started coming out that put some of the initial fearful information in perspective and context. So, for example, it turns out that there's a difference between infection fatality rate and case fatality rate. So we were hearing, and we still hear all the time in the news, the case fatality rate, which is the number of people, proportion of people who die with COVID, but the denominator there is the number of people that are diagnosed and detected with COVID. And the better number to look at is using a denominator of all people who have been infected with the virus. Because many are not detected. Many are asymptomatic, and many have very minimal symptoms and don't present to healthcare and don't get tested and are never detected. And when we look at studies that look at detecting antibodies in people, so evidence of a past infection with the virus, it turns out that the median infection fatality rate is 0.23%. And in fact, in people under 70 years old, the median is 0.05%, which means that 99.95% of those people infected with the virus survive. And so some of the fear is out of proportion to the actual risk. And it turns out that we learned who are really the high-risk groups, and that is older people. So people 70 and over have a much higher infection fatality rate than the younger people. And people 60 and over with severe comorbidities are also at risk. So people 60 and older with obesity and dementia and kidney disease and diabetes mellitus. So with learning who are really at high risk, a more focused strategy seemed to make more sense. And the other thing that became obvious is that every day we're bombarded with the data on the number of cases and the number of deaths, but we're not giving any context or denominators. And so it's very hard to interpret. We're not good with large numbers, and that's what we're being bombarded with all the time. And it turns out that in Canada in 2019, so in a non-pandemic year, there are over 797 deaths per day and 291,000 deaths per year. So that means that COVID is causing at most around 6% of overall deaths in Canada, which again puts some of those numbers in perspective. In fact, in the world, there are 160,000 deaths per day, and that is highly unequally distributed. And there are thousands of deaths a day from children under 5, from pneumonia and diarrhea, and deaths from tuberculosis and tobacco and motor vehicle collisions and dietary risk factors. So putting this all in perspective with the actual infection fatality rate, knowing the high-risk groups and context of what happens in usual years, started making me think, well, are lockdowns actually worth all the collateral harms that they can cause?
And herd immunity is something that often we hear talked about, but most of us probably don't fully understand how that works. So some medical experts seem to think that we can't reach herd immunity, while others do believe that we can if we don't use lockdowns as the primary COVID solution. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, the discussions about herd immunity have been confusing. Herd immunity basically means that enough people become immune to the virus so that the spread of infection reduces and dies out. And so we can talk about the R value, which is the number of average number of people infected or that have infection transmitted to them by the average person with the viral infection. And if that's over 1, then the virus keeps spreading. And if it's less than 1, meaning each infected individual infects on average less than 1 other person, then the epidemic and pandemic gradually end. So herd immunity means if enough people are immune, then that R value drops to below 1, and the transmission continuously reduces until the pandemic is over.
Is this something you think that can only be achieved if there's no lockdowns, though, or if everyone's vaccinated?
Right. Well, so the 2 ways to get immunity is to have the infection and develop natural immunity, or to have a vaccine and develop immunity that way. And more likely will eventually develop herd immunity by a combination of the 2. The real question is what to do in the meantime while we're waiting for herd immunity to occur. And that's where all the trade-offs of lockdowns come in, because lockdowns, first of all, the efficacy of lockdowns in preventing spread is surprisingly controversial, and there are several studies that suggest that their efficacy is highly exaggerated and is hard to demonstrate using real-world data. But even if lockdowns are effective in slowing transmission, that prolongs the time to natural herd immunity, meaning it slows progression of the infection so that herd immunity takes far longer to develop, and people would then impose lockdowns repeatedly. If we can get vaccines to enough people and achieve herd immunity that way, that obviously is a good thing. The question is how long that immunity lasts, and if it does not is not sustained, then we may still need lockdowns to supplement that until people can be revaccinated. So the question is really, one, do lockdowns work in preventing transmission and reducing the peak of cases? And if so, the second question is, are there benefits outweighing the costs of lockdowns?
Right, and your research leads you to believe that long-term lockdowns could actually have significantly more damaging effect on the health and well-being of people, right, than COVID itself.
Correct. So that's what I would argue, is that lockdowns have, and others have argued as well, that if you do a cost-benefit analysis of the effects of lockdowns, that it comes out against lockdowns, that their collateral harms are far higher than the benefits that they serve. And in fact, a minimum number in several cost-benefit analysis is that lockdowns cost 5 to 10 times more harm than benefit, and probably realistically it's more like 40 to 50 times more harm in terms of population well-being and mortality over the long term than benefit. And if you have time, I should explain how I arrive at those numbers.
Okay, sure. And I was also wondering too, if the medical community, do they have anyone actively engaged or someone specifically assigned to keep tabs on how many people are suffering negative health consequences or are dying as a result of restrictions and lockdowns? That's something people don't generally talk about, is it?
Right. That is a good question, because really to restrict our charter freedoms in a public emergency, the government and public health should demonstrate in a cost-benefit analysis that lockdowns have more benefits than harms. And as far as I know, I think the answer to your question is no, that nobody is collecting all of that data or doing a cost-benefit analysis about the effects of lockdowns. And if we think about it, lockdowns have many collateral effects, and there is a long list. I'll try to go through some of it quickly. They are devastating the developing world by putting the Sustainable Development Goals out of reach. They interrupted vaccinations of children, education of children, increased food insecurity, putting over 80 million more people this year into food insecurity, increasing severe poverty in the developing world by about 70 million people, and increasing mortality from infections like tuberculosis, malaria, and HIV. They're increasing violence against women. And in our own country, they're interrupting healthcare. Visits to emergency rooms for heart attack and stroke are down by about 50%, and non-urgent surgery and cancer diagnosis and treatment are down 20 to 50%. People are suffering from loneliness and unemployment, and there's a recession. And I want to point out what I learned is a very important point. We're often presented the trade-offs by framing the recession as being the economy versus lives. And of course, then we choose lives, but that's a very false and dangerous dichotomy, because it's not the economy versus lives. It's lives because of economic recession versus lives because of COVID. And if there's a recession, which there is, government spending on things like healthcare, education, roads, sanitation, housing, nutrition, vaccines, social security nets, clean energy, and all these other services is reduced. And these are the services that determine population well-being and life expectancy. And so if that spending is decreased, we can calculate that there will be statistical lives, what's called statistical lives lost in the years to come.
It's amazing the far-reaching adverse effects that COVID is having on everybody's lives. And I wish there was more time to talk about this because it's such a huge topic. But Dr. Joffe, thank you so much for joining me today and for your expertise. We really appreciate having you on.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Ari Joffe is a pediatrician at the Stollery Children's Hospital in Edmonton. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.